Welcome to Modern Management of the Older Adult, brought to you by the Institute of Clinical Excellence.
Everybody, and welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. My name is Christina Prevett. I am one of your division leads for the Modern Management of the Older Adult Division. And today I have a lesson or an episode on reflection. I am actually applying for some grant funding for some of the research that I'm continuing to do after my PhD. And it has a lot of areas where it reflects on where your career has gone, where your career has been. And you know, sometimes there's like this ageism that comes into our practice where we say, oh, well, this clinician's kind of a dinosaur, or this clinician is very old school. And I truly believe that that's rooted in ageism. And you don't become old school based on the number of years that you've been in practice. You become old school by the number of years that you've stopped learning anything new or changing your mind. And so I've been a clinician for over 10 years, and I want to talk today about 5 things that I have changed my mind on, from, being a newer clinician to being a more seasoned clinician. And I'm sure that Christina circa 2026 or 2027 is going to be different than Christina of 2024. And I think that is a really powerful thing, to give myself permission to change my mind as clinical practice and research evolves, because that's how we learn and we grow. And, I think about some of my early caseload, and I cringe at some of the things that I did, right? And it's because we're still learning, and that's okay. And I think having some time to reflect on that is really powerful. So the first one that I've changed my mind on, and this has been reflected actually in our course content if you have recently taken MMOA Live, is how quickly I prioritize dual task training in my interventions. So I used to think that if individuals are having issues, committed to lifelong learning, exactly, Ryan. If I have a person who has issues with static or dynamic balance, that I need to tackle that first before I can really dive into dual tasking. What that did, though, was it slowed down my progress, because now Christina of 2024, MMOA of 2024, recognizes that if that person has an issue with static balance, they've probably had an issue with dual tasking for a long time. And yes, we can prioritize and do some of that static and dynamic balance, but that dual tasking cannot wait, because it's such an important part of the mechanism at which individuals fall. And so it does not have to be, it's not a stepwise progression, right? You're going to hear I say a lot like and, not or, where I need to be putting dual tasking in at the very beginning. And what I can do is I can just start layering in interventions in static postures or dynamic positions to really increase my efficacy. And I've seen a lot of change in my clients' confidence when it comes to their capacity to go around their environment and not have their same issues with balance. So number one, that is something that I've changed my mind on, is that I don't have to do balance like a hierarchy of static to dynamic to dual tasking. I'm going to prioritize some of that dual tasking a lot earlier. So that's number one. Number two, and this isn't specific to Geri rehab, it's kind of more like full circle of all rehab for me, is I never thought that it was in my role, or I didn't know how far to dive into the emotions of rehab. And I don't know if that's just me going through my own life experiences and recognizing with injuries and ailments and different conditions, or seeing family members going through some of these conditions as well, about how much our emotions are tied into the rehabilitation process. That can be the emotion that is going on outside of rehab, whether that is sick loved ones, really stressful scenarios. That may be the fear of falling. I always thought that if I did my job and physically they got stronger, that fear of falling would just extinguish. And we know that that is not true. Christina of 2019 was wrong. That is incorrect. And Also, the emotional impact of being in pain for a long time. I have seen my therapeutic alliance jump significantly by acknowledging the emotions of rehab, of saying, I can definitely understand how difficult it has been that you have been bounced back and forth from providers for the last 10 years. Or I can totally understand how exhausting and what an emotional toll it has on you to have had knee pain for 10 years. And there's another therapist telling you that it's going to be better. And you've had this for a really long time and you're skeptical, right? Like acknowledging the emotional side that we are getting a snapshot into a person's life from an older adult perspective. Walking into my clinic, it might be them working really hard to show their capacity and being on their best behavior. And one of the things that I have changed my mind on is just how important it is to spend time diving into the emotional aspects that make up a person's lived experience. And I think a part of that is that I feel a lot more comfortable now as a provider that's been in practice for a while, being able to hold space for those individuals and understanding that acknowledging the emotions doesn't mean that I need to fix the emotions. And it has made a huge difference in terms of how fast I can connect with my people. And my husband used to always joke that people cry a lot in my office. And I think that is such a blessing. And it is a sign that you are creating a safe space for individuals. But know that if you are crying in my office, I'm probably going to be crying right along with you. My eyes are going to tear up because that's the emotional person that I am. But I think it's important. So number one is more like physical outcomes of prioritizing dual tasking a lot earlier in my interventions than I do now, or I used to do previously. The second one is not diving into the emotions of rehab. I didn't really feel like I was comfortable with that being my space. Number three is how much I use special tests with my older adults. So in my training, I feel like special tests were like the creme de la creme. Like we need to be doing all of these special tests in order to understand if it is the meniscus or the ACL or it could be arthritis or to really dive into our differential diagnosis. And over the last several years, as I've been reflecting on that, there's a couple of things that I have come to acknowledge. Number one is that most of our special tests are not validated in individuals over the age of 65. So when we are doing the sensitivity, specificity, reliability, validity for our special tests, like McMurray's anterior drawer, like all Feder's, Fabers, all these things, most of them are validated in individuals under the age of 65. And when I'm working with individuals over the age of 65, especially, I'm getting into individuals 70, 75, 80, I am not going to have a negative special test for a lot of these conditions. Individuals are being placed into ranges of motion that they have lost potentially a while ago. We have individuals who have wrinkles on the inside of their body, so they're not going to have all of their rotator cuff muscles. They're probably going to have a disc bulge. Like those special tests, all they did was they flared my people up. And I was coming out of a hole from a therapeutic alliance perspective because they were all like their joints were getting hot because I was putting them into too many positions that I should have known were definitely going to flare you up. And so not that I have completely ignored special tests, but I use them sparingly. And I have moved a lot of my practice to pain provocation and functional movement patterns and geriatric outcome measures that are really going to give me an idea of how individuals are doing functionally. Like I am working as an outpatient geriatric focused clinician. And so they are coming to me a lot of the times because they have pain. And so I'm not acknowledging pain, but I'm trying to reproduce pain in functional movements rather than in special tests. And a lot of my manual muscle testing, because our evidence in that is also poor and has also been validated in individuals under the age of 65, not taking into account age-related changes in muscular strength. Again, I'm using that as a pain provocation test and looking for differences from right to left, and having individuals acknowledge for themselves what are areas of movement that when they are doing resisted movement, it's painful. So I have changed my mind a lot on the way that I'm leveraging special tests for individuals over the age of 65 or 70. So that's number three. Number 4 are things that I've changed my mind on. So if you would have asked me as a newbie clinician, if I was ever going to be a teacher, if I was ever going to go into pelvic health, or if I was ever going to own a business, my dad always laughs because he asked about the teaching and the business side because he knew that I loved teaching, that I loved public speaking. And I'm like, no way, Dad, I'm never going to own a business. I'm never going to teach. And now I'm a researcher who is teaching. And I always said that pelvic health is like, check that one off my list. There's no way I'm going into it. And now I love it. But I think one of the things that I have really explored a lot more as I dove into the pelvic health space, which wasn't where I was at the very beginning of my career, is asking or at least screening for pelvic health complaints in men and women. And I say to anyone who is learning from me within our MMOA course that I believe that every geriatric clinician is a pelvic health clinician because so many individuals have bowel and bladder symptoms and they have pelvic floor complaints that are barriers to our interventions. And so I am a pelvic health clinician, so I dive into it probably a lot more than others. However, so many times I have individuals coming in for knee pain and I clear the pelvic floor and we end up in a whole other conversation about how hard it is for individuals to move about their day because they're constantly in the bathroom because of their diuretics, because they feel like they don't have enough bowel emptying, because constipation is making their stomachs hurt and they don't want to walk around their community because it hurts to do that. Their knee pain is impacting their sex life. There's so many things that come up. And just like we always want to clear the entire body, have you ever had a history of back pain or hip pain? Why are we ignoring the pelvic floor? So where I have definitely changed my mind is that there's a pelvic health screen in almost every single assessment that I do. And it's kind of a health and wellness side. I ask about nutrition, sleep, stress, how they're handling stress, nutrition, protein intake, bowel and bladder symptoms, and overall emotional well-being as part of all of my assessments with all of my people, irrespective of age, stage, reason for coming in. And it just allows me to kind of go through this checklist of wellness that's going to give me a very good picture of overall a person's recovery capacity. So that's number 2 or 4 is asking about pelvic health complaints. And number 5 is that this is kind of a little bit more cerebral that I've changed my mind in. When I was a newbie clinician and I was nervous going into different assessments, or I was getting exposed to things that I had never seen before, I believe that there was going to be a point where I felt 100% confident with what I was doing as a clinician. And now being in practice for 10 years, I realize that that is never going to be the case. I'm always going to have people that I am seeing that I am wondering if there are other things going on. I have a client right now who I think has a very rare neurodegenerative condition, but I'm second guessing myself because I don't want to put that into their head if I'm wrong. But some of the things, like my spidey senses that have been honed over 10 years of practice, are starting to tingle. And, she's in her late 60s and she's starting to have these symptoms, but I'm not 100% sure. And I think I was very naive when I was earlier in my practice, or maybe very optimistic to think that I was going to know all of the answers. And the answer is I don't. And so I always tell my clinicians that I'm teaching or my students that I am mentoring that you don't have to know all the answers. You just have to know the next step and have an idea of where you want to go, and then put trust in that, and then always be okay with changing your mind, right? That's where outcome measures are coming from, right? If a client is coming back after 4 to 6 weeks of strengthening and they're saying that their pain hasn't wiggled or moved at all, it's time for us to change tactics or try different exercises or try different manual therapy, whatever that may be. We want to give our interventions time to work, but we also want to know when the intervention isn't working. And that is okay for us to not be 100% confident. And I have totally embraced the I don't know. And I tell my clients that all the time. I say, I don't know. I can look this up for you. This is what I do know. This is where I think we want to go. And it becomes a conversation versus me feeling the burden of having to feel like I know all the answers all the time, because that's exhausting. And as soon as I let that go, and I recognize in research too that I thought with a PhD in geriatric rehab that I would know all the answers, and I don't. I know a lot about a very small area of practice, and I know how to find the answers in others. But after everything that I learned, I realized that there's other things that I still need to learn. And that's what makes me still excited about practice 10 years in. I don't feel like I'm feeling stale with my clients. I don't feel like, I don't have anything to learn from them anymore, because it's very special to be able to let go of that feeling that you have to know all the answers and explore things together with your people. And so those are some of the 5 things. I'm sure there's plenty more. But my 5 things that I've changed my mind on as a clinician with over 10 years experience in geriatric practice and a PhD in geriatric rehab is 1, dual tasking as a priority in balance training. I used to think that it was static balance, then like dynamic, and then add dual tasking at the end. I've flipped that and I've put dual tasking closer to the beginning. 2 is I thought that I was responsible for the physical body, and I didn't put as much emphasis on the emotional side of rehabilitation in a lot of different ways. Fear of falling, the emotion of being in pain, and the psychosocial considerations of the person in front of me. Number 3 is I use special tests very sparingly now in my older adults over the age of 65. 1, because a lot of our special tests have been validated in younger populations. And 2, a lot of my older adults are going to have positives on many special tests, and it's not really going to influence what I do in rehab. And I've moved more to a geriatric outcome measure, functional movements lens, and seeing really, really positive benefits. Number 4 is screening for the pelvic floor. Number 5 is that at some point I thought that I was going to feel 100% confident, and that is just not true. And I have so many more, like around post-operative complications and post-surgical guidelines. Like there's so many things that I'm just noodling on, and it's pretty exciting. I love that I get to noodle on things and change my mind and push providers and push clinicians and push physicians on different ideas and pull that critical thinking lens. And I think that that reflection is so positive. It's so helpful to be able to take that lens to your practice. Even if it's, 2 or 3 minutes of thinking like, is there something I could do differently with this person today? So that's going to be my call to action for this podcast is reflect on your own biases, where are your ruts, and what have you changed your mind on in the last 5 years in practice? Because it's pretty cool. We don't have old school clinicians because of the amount of time they've been in practice. It's the amount of time that they've stopped learning. All right. If you want to get into MMOA, our last level 1 of the year starts October 16th. If you have taken our level 1 online, then you can jump into Advanced Concepts level 2. That is October 17th. 4 courses, October 12th, 13th, Paoli, Pennsylvania, and Highland, Michigan is where we are at. And October 19th, 20th, we are in Brookfield, Wisconsin, near Milwaukee, and Fountain Valley, California. So if you want to jump into a live course before the end of the year, have at it. I hope to see you at one of those courses. Otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your week, everybody. And I hope that reflective practice was helpful for you all.
Thank you for listening to the MMOA podcast. If you found this helpful, please share with someone that could benefit. And if you're looking for more practical content to help you better serve older adults, head over to www.mmoa.online, where you can learn more about our free resources, our community, continuing education courses, and our certification. Once again, that's www.mmoa.online. Thanks for listening.